Let's continue to this now. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel to China from Wednesday, where he will meet senior Chinese officials, including Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Shanghai and Beijing, to discuss issues including the crisis in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, Taiwan and the South China Sea. SABC News correspondent Westbrook has more from Hong Kong.
US officials have framed this trip as part of efforts to resume normal channels of communication with China. And we have seen a flurry of dialogue, especially in the last month. With US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's trip to China, there was a phone call between US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Both of those happened earlier this month. And then last week, for the first time since 2022, the country's two defense ministers also had a phone call. Now, top of his mind for US Secretary of State Antony Blinken on this trip to China will be two main goals. The first of which is stopping Chinese companies funding Russia's war effort in Ukraine, as well as de-escalating this growing conflict in the Middle East. China has a growing influence in both of these areas. The Global Times, a state-run newspaper in China, has said that both countries have stabilized relations in recent months, but it said the situation does remain extremely fragile. Beijing is also unhappy with what it sees as the US being increasingly in its backyard, particularly in the South China Sea. For example, holding naval exercises there. China claims most of the South China Sea, but there are overlapping claims with other countries, including the Philippines. Now, China's also quite unhappy with the US claims that it is having overcapacity in manufacturing, particularly in new energy industries. The Global Times says the US was blaming China for its own lack of competitiveness. Still, though, the US is keen to stress that relations are in a very different place than they were a year ago, and having candid discussions is a good thing. Westbrook, SABC News, Hong Kong.